Stage 3 is to add the materials, the scale, and the atmosphere. So first thing I'll look at is the atmosphere, because I've got it pre-set up, and you can just copy it through if you want, or you can just use it from the sample scene that is on the CD. So I've got global radiosity that gives us that color reflected light, and I have a high sunlight light balance, and what this does is it sharpens the shadows, makes them a lot darker, and I've got a sky dome lighting gain to fill in those shadows. Without the sky dome lighting gain, these areas through here would sorry, if I just increase the size of this, I'll show you the last you can see this area in here is slightly blue, and that's because of the sky dome lighting gain, whereas over here in the direct sunlight you cannot see that blue light because it's in direct sunlight. So that's what that's doing. And then in the sky, fog and haze, you can have a look at these settings, but they're all on the CD anyway. So okay, into the materials for our procedural terrain. I'm just going to hide our meta blob, and we'll go into the procedural terrain, edit material, and we're going to click on mixed material. And what this is going to do is add two materials, which we're then going to color. We'll use the highlighters, so you can click on these two highlighters and right click and hold to change the color. And so we'll choose a dark orange, and let's go with a lighter one, sort of same hue, but just two different lightness. And we'll load up a distribution, and this is going to we'll choose just the sedimentary rock, and this will just split up the two materials based on the grey and black values of this fractal. You can't really see it over here at the moment because the mixing proportions are a little incorrect, but you can see it here now. If I just zoom in on that, you can see that the brown levels are appearing on the higher areas and the lighter rock is on the lower. But what we're going to do now is go into influence of environment. Now this is where the power comes out in your terrain geometry. If you've got a really quality mesh that you've imported, this is where you can really extract some of that detail. So we're going to turn off the altitude influence, and we're going to crank the influence of slope up to about 70, high 70s, and we'll make sure that at the moment it doesn't matter which one of these is ticked, so because we're going to be loading different materials into there anyway. So if I'm just got to look at your preview window to check the mixing proportions, because sometimes it'll just be all one color, and so that just means you've got to shift the mixing proportions to the other material. So here you can see that material starting to pop up, and on the flatter surfaces is our lighter rock, and on the on the steeper surfaces is our lighter rock, and on the flatter surfaces is our brown rock. And I'm going to increase the smooth blending strip to say 30%, maybe even bigger, 40%, just to sort of hide that seam. I might even increase the influence and slope for this particular terrain. So click render again, and you'll see a little bit better, more for mixing between these materials. Okay, so now that we've got that, I might want to keep on playing around with these. I might reset. You can reset or try a few different options. Maybe try a different sedimentary rock to get a different effect, and I think I like that first one actually. And we will now go in and copy across that material. In fact, first of all, if you change the scale of these as well, you can get more frequent lines across the terrain. So we'll drag this across, click and drag the thumbnail onto the apostle, what I've called apostle, which is our meta blob, and we'll render again, so you can now start to see how the two are meshing really nicely. And at the moment, the meta blob still looks much nicer because because it has all that extra displaced geometry detail in there, and so it's going to look naturally a lot nicer. But now I'm pretty happy with those. It's time to select the two materials for it. So we can go into, if you click on these four circles, this is our material preview, summary of materials. That's what it is. And we can see that both these materials are exactly the same, so they're in here, and I can edit it. If I was to select this one and edit it here, I would then have to drag it back to the procedural terrain, and that's just extra work. So coming into here, we'll right click on the first material, and we'll go into we're going to look for the red brown rock, which is right here under the rocks section, and I'm going to load that one in, and then we're going to load this same one in to the second option, but this time with the second one or the first one, depending on where you'd prefer them. We're going to change the luminosity and just bring it down. And what that's going to do is we're going to get a very similar material, but it's just going to essentially be colored differently based on the slope. So if we check that out, we see that our preview render. I might actually come back into the first one, increase the saturation, darken that a little bit, just because I like a browner color, and that's also because it's highly dependent on your atmosphere. If you're using the default atmosphere, it's going to be a very different result. You're going to probably need to go with lighter values, but I use a very bright lighting scheme, so that's why I go with darker. So okay, we've got our mixed proportions here, and you've got this dark brown going to light brown, and I'm pretty happy with that. So next we're going to add an ecosystem. So in order to do this, our mixed material it says the type is mixed material, but if we want it to be an ecosystem and we click it, it doesn't actually remove that mixed material, it just adds a new ecosystem layer. So if we do it again, click on the bottom layer and then change it to an ecosystem, oh look, it adds another layer. It's a little bit of a silly quirk, but you know what, it works. So for this first layer, we're going to add two plants. We're going to add the alder late spring, double click on that, and there it is. And we're going to add the alder late summer, which is on and these are both high resolution trees, so you may want to use, if you're going for a massive distant view instead of a close-up, you might want to use the plum tree, which is only 10 to 20,000. This is a really good massive scale sort of tree, or even the rural maple tree, which is 20 to 80,000. Sometimes the summer cherry tree, but that's getting up even higher. Anyway, so add these two in, and we're going to increase the presence of one of them to about 1.75, just to mix up the proportions. You could reduce this one to 0.35 or whatever. It's not going to increase. It's not going to influence the density. It only influences the ratio. So for every one of these trees, there's 1.75 of those. And next we'll go to the density tab and move it up to about say 70, 75, 78%, and we'll just skip over these two. We'll come to those in our second ecosystem. We're going to go straight to the presence, and what we want to do is restrict these plants to only grow at the top of this terrain and the top of our meta blob, and only on the flat surfaces. So we want them down here as well, but not so many, and we also want them to sort of fade off, because if you imagine, the trees probably wouldn't come around here if it was too choppy and there was water and spray, and they just wouldn't be able to hold on. There'd be a lot more wind as well, maybe. So we're going to decrease the altitude range. We'll bring that up to just the middle, and the slope range we'll bring up to about 45. So that means as it starts to get to a steeper slope at 45 degrees, it's going to cut off. So nothing will grow on a 45-degree slope or more. But then we're going to just increase the fuzziness on steep, and also fuzziness at the bottom a little bit on each, because this will just help with the grading to make our ecosystem fade out and grow a little bit towards the bottom, but not too much. So lastly, I'm just going to increase our overall scaling. This is a little tip that I find helpful when starting scenes, because it can take such a long time to populate. It's good to just increase the scale to something like 10, just to see if it's working properly, and then scale it back, because you don't want to be waiting there for 5 minutes for 2 billion poly or 2 million trees to populate. In this case, I can see the trees there. I'm pretty happy with the scale. I can sort of start to decrease the size now, and that's populated with 55,000. Probably want actually a few more. I want some across this area. I don't want that part of my metablob to be without trees. So I'll increase the density a little bit. Populate again. We should see some trees starting to form in there. Maybe an altitude or a slope constraint. You can just play around with these. It shouldn't be an altitude constraint because we've got this all the way down here. So let's move that, and we'll move this altitude constraint up, because I don't want trees down on this bottom section here. I just want them to sort of come down a little bit on the cliff, but not all the way to the bottom. Alright, so I'll render that, and we'll see what this looks like. Alright, so that took 20 seconds, and on a preview, and we've got a couple of trees coming down here. We've got this one down the bottom, probably a little bit too far down, but I like these ones through here, and I do want more around this area. So what I'm going to do is we'll increase the altitude range again, right up to the top, so that we're really restricting this to the top section. And I can see I've now cut off that section, so I'll just tweak around with that. And the slope range, I'm going to decrease that to say about just under 20 degrees. So hopefully we're going to start getting a couple of trees in here. I think there's a few in there, and we will let's see, decrease that again. Just play around with it a little bit, and there we go. Now we've got them back in here in that groove nicely. So before I render again, I'm going to go and add our second ecosystem plant. So we go into the first tab, add plant, and add the date palm. And where is it? It is, these are two of the other palms you can use, but the date palm is just a little bit more extravagant. It's nicer colors, I find. So in the density, we'll reduce this right down to like 6% or 4%, and we will also go into the scaling and variation. We'll turn down the keep proportions, and what that does is it will randomize in all directions instead of just uniformly scaling our ecosystem. Then we'll come into the color variation tab, and what this will do is randomly color our dates, our date palms, depending on their position on our terrain. And so we'll just load in by enabling it, right click and go load function, and go into the spots and get the soft spots noise preset. And again, as I was saying, I mean, these presets, there's almost no reason to go past them for general creation. I mean, this is only driving the color distribution. So we haven't seen anything here because we've got a solid color. So we want to load a color map, and we'll load in the fields or foliage, doesn't matter. But I don't want that brown, so I'll select that tab, right click, edit color, change it to like a darker green, and delete that one, and might do the same one to this as just another green. So we've got a different kind of flow through there. Might make this one a little lighter. You could go with really extreme colors if you want, really change up the colors a lot, like this, and then you can see the effect here. If I change this to say 1 and change the influence of it down to 50%, and what that will do is it'll blend the natural color with the color that you've set in here by 50%, so you won't get extreme color variations, but you'll get a mix of the two. And lastly, we'll go into the presence, and we'll actually go and set them to the same settings as we had with our previous one. We don't need any fuzziness because we don't really have that many of them, so there's no real reason to calculate that. Although what we do want to do before we populate it is set the overall scaling to the same size, and probably just a little bit bigger, because we want these to actually pop out through the canopy and stand out a little bit more. So you can see that there they are popping out through, and I'll go back, and for some reason now other plants have disappeared from here, but now you can see them nicely popping out through there. So I'll do an area render for you, and we'll have a look at just that section through there. One thing I don't like is this background terrain here with the plants on it, and I'd probably paint that out in the terrain editor, and I'll show you how to do that. So here we go, we've got our date palms, and they're probably too big now because our other trees are really quite small, and these are sort of poking out way too much. So we'll go back in and into our material through here, and change the scale to 1.75. Might increase the density a little bit to get a couple more up there as well. There we go, and it keeps clearing that population, but that's fine. We can just go back and populate. You could use dynamic population as well, but if you've got the RAM in your machine, you may as well use it there. Alright, so I'm going to go in and get rid of this background portion here. Double click on the terrain, and you can, if you click on this button up here, shows the entire scene, and this will show you a real-time representation of what is actually placed and where things are. So that makes me sure that it's this section here I need to get rid of. So we'll go into sculpt, and we'll invert our brush, and we'll just no, we won't, we'll leave it as is, and we'll lower this through the water plane. So as it disappears, I know that that's now disappearing underneath the water, and if I turn that off, I can see what I'm actually affecting without the ecosystem. So that's then displaced our fractal, so that'll permanently keep it down. It'll still have all the detail, it's just going to displace it overall. So now if I go back in and repopulate, I've got two materials now, so I want to copy that and paste it onto here, and don't populate. This is not working correctly. If you click and drag the thumbnail from up the top, and you can drag it onto your material, and that should then apply them to both, but it hasn't for some reason. But nevertheless, we'll untick that, populate one and the other, and then come to our other material, I don't know, it's changed it to dynamic population for some reason. And you can see now there's no trees back in the background there either, so that's good. Alright, so if I'm just going to place the sunlight where I would like it, which is just on the right side, so it's casting a shadow through this, through our meta blob, and I'm going to click render, and we'll come back once that's done. Alright, we're back. 33 seconds that took. So we've still got a bit of issues with our material, and I'm going to start adding a little bit of grain to this material because I really don't like it as is. But our ecosystem is actually looking pretty nice, pretty colorful, and ready for a little bit of color correction in post. I'm going to move my camera a little bit as well because it's too close. I don't like. There's not enough fade out from the haze, and everything's just a little bit too close. So let's move it closer to the terrain. Maybe look in a little bit. So 30, let's say 34 mil, and I'm going to go into our aerial perspective in the sky, fog and haze. I'm crank it up to say 3. Maybe I'll go up to, no, that's actually pretty good. Now what that's going to do is just multiply the effect, so it's essentially 3 meters in, well, 1 meter in the world is 3 meters of atmospheric effect. So you can see now in the right there's a lot more haze, and the everything's getting faded out a little bit of in blue. So for our material, I'll edit the material, come into our material tab, and if we look at our bump, it's just a crappy little terrain fractal. So either you can play around with that or load up a function, and we could load up anything, but say in the bumps tab, let's try desert bump and see how that comes out. Not really too well because it's way too big. The scales, depending on whether you're using Vue 9.5 or 9 or 8, if you're going back past 9, you may find the scaling is completely different because they did actually rebuild a lot of the scaling. So I'll do an area render once this cancels, and I'll just click on this button here, and you can, if you've already selected an area, then you'll have it up here. You just click once and you can drag it down, and we can do that area render now, and that'll speed things up considerably. Okay, so you can see now, because I've only dragged that bump, I've only added that bump to our vertical slope. You can see there's a lot of grain in there now. So what I'm going to do is go back in again. I'm going to copy across the bump from the first one and copy it into the second one, and I'm going to reduce it to 3, and then I'm going to reduce the first one to about 1.5 because, or maybe 1, because the first one is these vertical cliff faces, and I just have a feeling that I'm going to prefer the look of a vertical face being a little bit smoother than our flat faces. So we'll do another render, and this is going to add a lot of detail. Now you can see it needs it also needs the final rendering to actually make it look good again, but it's getting there as well. So I might increase the smooth blending and change it back to simple. Play around with these. The cubic bumps, this middle one, is great for snow, and simple blend and full blend are great for the rest of general materials. Okay, so I'll click and drag that once more across onto our other material, and let's not check that out. Let's go with a full render.